Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, I present to you our president, Dr. Kevin Behrns.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, good morning. Thank you, Becky. I really appreciate your kind and warm introduction. I also appreciate your friendship, your service to and leadership in the Southeastern Surgical Congress. It's been really terrific, so thank you. And I want to welcome everybody here, right? You are 576 strong in the number of attendees, which is a great number of attendees, so welcome to Charlotte. This will be a great meeting. I want to first there we go, disclose my conflict. I am the co-editor of the journal Surgery, a position for which I receive compensation. In this presentation, however, there'll be no commercial interest or bias related to my position as a co-editor of Surgery. So I really enjoyed putting this presentation together. I learned a lot. Hopefully I can share some thoughts with you that will transfer and you will find meaningful. So today I'm going to spend a few minutes and talk about the strengths of the Southeastern Surgical Congress, which are many, but I want to focus on a few. Second, I want to discuss a decision-making process. It's a homegrown process, but it's inclusive, and I want to discuss how I came about this process and some steps in the process. I also want to take a look at how bias, self-awareness, and bias that you have can affect the decision-making process and how that needs to be examined. And then I want to spend a few minutes talking about the value of getting dissenting opinions when you're making a decision. It's critically important, so we'll spend some time on that. So I really think of the Southeastern Surgical Congress as one of the premier organizations for general surgery. And this organization is vital to general surgery because we're unique. Here's how we're unique. We have a diverse membership. There are very few other organizations that have academic surgeons, community surgeons, medical students present, residents, fellows, and advanced practice providers. That makes us unique, and that's a strength of ours, and we need to use that strength. Often when we talk about our esteemed colleagues in surgery, right, we say to folks, well, that surgeon has really great hands. That person's really gifted from the standpoint of their hands. Sometimes we talk about a surgeon and say, wow, they have a really great intellect. They're very astute. Sometimes we talk about the great compassionate care that they give. All of these are important. These are important traits to be a great surgeon. But I really think the strength of the Southeastern Surgical Congress is the information and the knowledge that we share so that we can make better decisions. And so when we use the diverse opinions of many providers that we gather in the room here, that becomes a real strength for us, not only here, but at our home institutions. So if you look at our core, right, we are general surgeons, and general surgeons are really the core discipline for surgery. We're the surgeons that back up and take a big, broad view of surgery and the critically ill patient, and those patients that really need diverse help across many disciplines. And so general surgery is really the core strength, and sharing knowledge like we do here allows us to really make those great decisions. So when you think about the Southeastern and you think about the poster presentations, the manuscripts we prepare for our journal, The American Surgeon, conversations in the hallway, the poster sessions, all of the sharing of knowledge helps strengthen us so that we give impeccable care to our patients back home. So this is vitally important to improve the quality of surgery, not only at our home institution, but across the country. So I really invite everybody to really engage in this meeting. Ask questions, have discussions with your friends, colleagues, and people you don't know. Go meet people you don't know and strengthen your decision making, because that's what the Southeastern Surgical Congress is about. So before I really talk about decision making and steps in decision making, I want to talk a little bit about principles of decision making. I really enjoyed reading this book, Principles. It's been on the top 10 seller list for a while. And it's by Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio is the former CEO of Bridgewater, a top 5 Forbes private company that is a multi-billion-dollar company. And he built this company over years. And he started at age 26 out of his apartment. And he realized that as he was building this company, he was doing this based on principles. And he recorded these principles over time. And the result is his book, right, called Principles. It's a great read, and I'd highly recommend it. Of course, we want the truth. We need the truth in surgery, right? Surgery is based on reviewing the data and having the truth. So the truth is certainly the goal. We'll talk quite a bit about self-awareness today and bias, because I think that's important, and at least for me, it's not something that I've always recognized, but something I should have paid more attention to. Mr. Dalio talks about transparency, and not only being transparent, but radical transparency, a culture of being radically transparent where you share information so people understand that the decisions that are made. They value dissent, which is important, and they learn from their mistakes. They really stop when they make a mistake. Stop and learn and say, what is it that went wrong, and how did that happen, and what can we learn from it? They talk about removing emotion from your decisions, use the data. And then finally, create a culture where the best idea wins, so that people are engaged, and so any idea can win, no matter the source of the idea. So these are the Kevin Behrns 7 steps to making a decision, okay? We're going to go through each of these in some detail, all right? But the first thing I try to do is make sure that I'm addressing the right question, right? Do I understand the question that I'm really trying to address and to make a decision? That's critically important. 2, sit back and think, how do I think this is going to turn out? What's my perspective on this without data, right? Without knowing any data. How do I think about that? And that's really important. Having the big perspective is critically important, because that's in this book, Factfulness, a top 10 book. That's what Hans Rosling talks about, is having the facts right. He notes that, and we know this from our home institutions, when we sit back and think about our home institutions, we often think that we're in the worst shape possible or things couldn't get worse, but it's not right. It's not true. We've come a long way. And if you look at this book, he worked in public health, so he wrote a lot about advances in public health. We've come a long, long way in healthcare. We still have a long way to go. But it's important because you have to start at this from the right perspective. So that's step 2. Step 3, you gather the data and you analyze the data. So far, I know that this doesn't sound like really anything new, right? This sounds like the scientific method. And indeed, I think the first 3 steps are related to the scientific method. But the scientific method and experimentation are different than making a decision. So when you think about making decisions, there are additional steps. That includes step 4, to test your self-awareness and see how the way you think influences the decision in the process. And then 5, we should invite dissent into the process so that we understand how others think about it. And then 6, we need to be transparent about it. And finally, 7, we need to communicate this clearly. So let's look at step one and use an example of step one. So decision making, when I'm talking about decision making today, I'm primarily talking about incremental, step-by-step thought process and decision making, not the snap decisions. We'll talk about that a little bit. But this is the decision making process that I use when I need to slow down and make a deliberate decision. In medicine, and especially in surgery, sometimes we're a little quick to pull the trigger on a decision. And we're quick because we want to advance the care of the patient. We're eager to deliver efficient care to the patient. But sometimes the best course of action is to slow down, think about it, get your data, and make an informed decision. So let's use it as an example. This CT scan here has a cyst in the pancreatic head. This is something that I address on a regular basis. And frequently, the most frequent question I'd be asked by the residents or trainees, should we get GI to drain this, or should we just operate on it? I'd say, whoa, we need to back up a little bit, right? We need to know the origin of this cyst. Where did it come from? And it may be that you can answer that in as few as two simple questions that you ask the resident or the patient. So you ask the resident or the patient, is the patient male or female? Because if the patient's a male, right, we know that the cystic lesions of the pancreas, there's 5 common cystic lesions of the pancreas, right? Pseudocyst, serous cystadenoma, mucinous cystadenoma, mucinous cystadenocarcinoma, and IPMN. And 3 out of those 5 arise primarily in women. So that's an important question. Simple question. Is a patient a man or a woman? The second question is, has the patient had pancreatitis? If they've not had pancreatitis, then you know this thing is not a pseudocyst, right? So you know if this CT scan is from a male, which it is, and the patient has not had pancreatitis, which is true, then this cystic lesion is IPMN, or intraductal papillary mucinous neoplasm of the pancreas. That's what this is. So that shows you the importance of getting the questions right and going in a sequence, right? Because you can save a lot of steps and a lot of time, and you can make a good decision for the patient. So when you're looking at the question, why is it that we sometimes try to jump ahead in the question, in answering the question? It may be because the question that you really need to address and answer is hard. It's a difficult question. And it's much easier to answer the alternative question. And in his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning author and a professor of psychology, notes that this is System 1 and System 2 thinking is what he calls it. So System 1 thinking is when we can make a very quick, rapid-fire response to a question. And the reason that we can do that is because we have a ton of experience and expertise, and we have the knowledge at hand to make a quick decision. System 2 is more difficult to engage, right? This is the internal computer. You need to stop and think, and you need to go through the 7 steps or some iteration thereof to be able to make a good decision. So really the trick is to say, when do I need to slow down and employ a more deliberate system, or when is it okay to have System 1 thinking? Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink also talks about System 1, that rapid-fire response, right? And he calls it the adaptive unconscious. And this is helpful, right? And this really applies to surgery. How do people make great decisions in crisis situations, like the operating room, when things aren't going well? And how do some people have a sense of what to do and make great decisions? That sense of what to do is based on years of data and recognition that is stored in your brain and you can deploy rapidly. So System 1 and System 2 are both important. It's just a matter of what system do you use when. We know that in medicine, right, for a diagnosis, we rely heavily on pattern recognition. And we're right about 80 to 85% of the time with pattern recognition for a diagnosis. We've seen something so many times, we can easily look at a scan, look at the data or the information, or listen to the patient and say, this is the diagnosis. And we're right a lot of the time. But I think the key for us in medicine and surgery, that's great to use that system, but when is it not appropriate? That's the question. When is it not appropriate, and when do we have to slow down and make a deliberate decision? And in his book, Sources of Power, Gary Klein discusses when you should use System 1 and System 2, and when is mental simulation required, when do you have to have a more rational and thoughtful approach, and when do you have to use problem-based detection and solving. This book is a classic in the critical thinking and analysis literature. So once you know the question and you have a good understanding of the question, you can go to step 2 and think about the hypothesis, right? So we're taught by the scientific method, right, to state the null hypothesis. That is, there is no difference between groups. But we also know as scientists that we rarely take this purist approach. We usually have some kind of bias about it. So we rarely state the null hypothesis. But hypothesis generation is important because you have to design a study if you're going to have an in-depth look at a question. And we know that we can design various types of studies that will yield different types of data and different types of evidence, right? We know that the best level of evidence is a level 1 evidence or a randomized controlled trial, and that delivers great evidence. But it takes a lot of time to generate those data, and it's expensive. Level 2 data are also good, and that's probably a randomized controlled trial that has a flaw, like the dose of the drug that was administered wasn't optimal, or it's a meta-analysis or a systematic review. Level 2 data are good as well. Level 3 data is retrospective data, right? Comparing a cohort of patients to a control group. Level 4 data is just really descriptive data, looking at the results or the outcomes of a group of patients without any controls. And level 5, we use it a lot to make decisions in surgery, right? Expert opinion, because we call our friends or we have a conference. And that's how we make a decision about should we operate on the patient or not. And so that is an important level of evidence for us to consider. So I want to tell you about a study that I did as a junior faculty member at the University of North Carolina. And just use it as an example of how to generate a hypothesis and how to address it. So I was seeing a lot of patients with what I called moderately severe gallstone-induced pancreatitis. These patients came in, they looked sick. They did not look well, and I thought they were going to go on to full-blown pancreatic necrosis and go to the ICU. But to my surprise, they got better in a couple days. And they got well so fast, in fact, that they got back on a diet. And by our teaching, right, they should have a cholecystectomy before they leave the hospital. But if you look at this CT scan, I was like, jeepers, I really don't want to do a lap chole in the bed of that inflammation. So what could we do? So I proposed to our GI folks that we would do ERCP with an endoscopic sphincterotomy to buy time to protect the patient from recurrent pancreatitis, and we would go back at a later date and remove the gallbladder. So the level of evidence in this is not high. This is level 4. We didn't even have a control group, right? But we did this study. We did this study on 30 patients, and actually it worked very well. We had no recurrent pancreatitis, which is what we're concerned about if we leave the gallbladder in place. Right? We had no urgent operations for acute cholecystitis. And 90% of the patients that had an operation got a lap chole. But we did have a pretty high readmission rate of 23%. because one of the gastroenterologists really didn't want to do a sphincterotomy, so they slipped a stent in, which led to cholangitis and a readmission. So, but this study just shows you how you can formulate a simple question, right? Design a study to answer that question and offer patients an alternative therapy. So step 3 is gathering data and data analysis. Now this is the most laborious step, and it's a difficult step, right? Not only do you have to collect the data, but you have to decide what type of data do we need, right? Do we need a randomized controlled trial? Do we really need to go to that level? That's going to cost a lot of money. What are the quality of the data that are available to you, right? Do you have good quality data that's already published? Or maybe you have good quality data, but what if it's only one study? Is that good enough, right? Will that help you make the decision? So it's not only quality of data, what's the quantity of data? Then if you're basing your decision on an expert review, how many expert opinions do you want? Or how much do you value an expert opinion? And what do you do if you get disparate expert opinions? How do you reconcile that difference? And you can see that you can go on and on with the questions like this. And we all have seen people in medicine who have paralysis by analysis, right? Study the data, and don't make a decision. This talks about decision making. We need to make a decision, right? So I think, as pointed out by this publication from the National Academy of Medicine, that clinical decision support is going to become more and more important to the clinicians, because we have so much data available to us that it's hard to sift through it. It is very difficult to organize it and to use it effectively. So any tool that helps us make those decisions will be a great advance. And I think artificial intelligence can really ease us in the future with data gathering and data analysis. So let's talk just a minute about how you could approach reconciling discordant data. So if you have data that are opposite ends of the spectrum, or maybe they're not that far apart, but they just don't align, how do you approach that? Well, you could look at the study quality. Randomized controlled trial data is going to be better than a case cohort study for sure, and you can make a decision on that. Or you can take existing publications and use the data from those publications and the probabilities to construct a Markov model to forecast what an outcome might be like. That's going to be difficult, and it's as far as a level of sophistication and training that most surgeons don't have. So it's probably not going to be easy for us to apply that. We could think about the Delphi method. The Delphi method is which you send data to experts, and they review the data, and they forecast or predict the outcome. You go through a couple of rounds of this to try to move towards consensus. You could do that, and that approach might work. Or you could rate the expert opinion. Now, I found this very interesting at Bridgewater. What they do is they have a process that they call believability weighting. And if they don't know an answer to a question, or they need confirmatory data, or what they do is they have their employees vote. So they pose the question, and then the employee votes. But that vote is weighted, and that vote is weighted on the correctness of the previous responses by that individual. So they have a huge database of how correctly people forecast their answers, right? And so they have a system that they call believability weighting, and they created what they refer to as the idea meritocracy. The best idea wins, and the vote wins. So just in data gathering and analysis, so just think a minute about existing in the post-truth era, right? So some folks say we're in the post-truth era. But in surgery, doesn't exist, right? We don't have fake news in surgery. No, we don't want the opinions that reign supreme on social media. We want data, right? We want evidence-based data. And then his book, Weaponized Lies. Levitin espouses the need to be analytical about the data, to think like a statistician, and to combat fake news or any anti-science bias with data. And I really love his statement that the scientific method is the ground from which all best critical thinking arises. I think as surgeons, especially today, we need more training in data analysis and biostats. Because often now it's difficult for us to interpret the papers that are published. And I say this as a co-editor. I see a lot of papers, and sometimes I'm like, I just don't understand the statistical approach. It's just too deep. So let's now move on to step 4, self-awareness and bias. Now, this is something I've only recently come to appreciate and come to study a little bit. And let's think about it from the standpoint of a leader. Everybody here in this room is a leader. They lead a service, they lead a program, a division, a department. So let's look at leadership. I learned a lot from this book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, and the CLG coaches. And they talk about leading from above the line or leading from below the line. Above the line leading is characterized by ownership, accountability, responsibility, whereas below the line leading is blame, excuses, and denial. Now, if we're truthful with ourselves, we all can go above and below the line. The goal is to be above the line more than we're below the line. And when you talk about states of leadership, one state of leadership is the to me kind of leadership. You know, all this stuff happens to me. It's somebody's fault. This didn't work out. And we blame others. That's to me leadership and not a desired leadership state. By me leadership is a little bit more advanced in that the leader takes responsibility. Unfortunately, they take too much responsibility and they try to fix every problem. And they can't fix every problem. The leader can't fix every problem. So you need an even higher leadership state, which is through me. That is, you create a culture where if there's a disagreement between individuals, you don't have to referee it, right? You may mediate it, you may guide it, but the individuals sit down and talk through it and come to a reasonable decision. And ASME leadership is kind of in the zone. Your organization is so well oiled, so well greased. You have a culture where people just make this happen seamlessly. And it's like, you know, being the unconscious three-point shooter, Stephen Curry, who's just draining them, right? It just happens because that's the culture that you established. So today, a lot of folks, and I bet a lot of folks in this room have gotten their 23andMe, checked their DNA, right? And it's really popular. A lot of people are getting it done. But truthfully, there's not much you could do to change your DNA, right? But you could change your behavior, right? So I'd submit that it's just important to understand your personality and who you are as an individual. And you can do that. One approach to doing that is by the Enneagram. And the evaluation for an Enneagram includes a series of short questions, about 35, 40 questions. You can answer these in about 20 minutes. It's very quick, very straightforward. And then you might get an interview, and they might pose a difficult situation to you, ask you some difficult questions and how you would respond to a situation and how you would get out of a pickle. And that's the evaluation process. And then you can be typed into one of these 9 personality types. And if you look at these personality types, you can see that I'm going to start over here, that types 2, 3, and 4 are called the heart type individuals or personalities. And they're centered around the emotion where these individuals, the giver, the performer, and the romantic, they're concerned about their image. They're worried about their image. So that's the emotion that they're concerned with. If you look at the brain types, 5, 6, and 7, the observer, the loyal skeptic, or the generalist, or the sensual person, these folks are concerned, their emotion is fear. They fear for safety. They're really concerned about safety. And then types 8, 9, and 1, these are body types. Some people call them gut types. And these people have anger. Now, some, you don't see it, but they have an angry streak. So you can see from this table that you can really delve into this and get deep into the personality types and by the label, by the emotion, what's the personality structure, what's the defense mechanism that is associated with it, and what's the blind spot. So we're not going to go through every one of this table, but I suspect many people in this room, as a surgeon, would consider themselves the boss. So let's look at this. The boss, or personality type 8. Type 8s, their emotion is lust. Type 8s are big personality people. They want to do things in a big, bold way, and they want to make a statement. And these folks will take on big tasks. They're forceful. They can be confrontational. They have a lot of desire for power. Their defense mechanism is denial. And their blind spot is that they can't see themselves as at risk at all. They don't see that. So this helps you think about how people think about decisions that you're going to make. So let's get up close and personal with this, right? And here I'm obviously bearing my soul, right? In that I am a type 1. Which is the body or gut type. It's associated with anger. And type 1s are perfectionists or reformers. They want order, structure, control, and critical analysis. That's how they see the world. Type 1s have an intuitive sense of how things should be done correctly. What's the right way to do this? And they're wedded to this deeply. And these folks can be quite righteous. So those are some characteristics of a type 1. Other characteristics are they're critical. They can do critical analysis. They're critical of other people. And they can be really critical of themselves as well. So those are some characteristics of type 1. But let me show you how this lives out a little bit. So obviously as a chairman and a dean, as a faculty member, I've had a lot of people come to me and, ask me questions or say, hey, look, we talked about this problem at conference, and I have the solution. And they tell me the solution, and I'll listen to the solution. And I think I'm listening intently. But while they're telling me the solution, I'll look at them and I'll say, yeah, that might work. But in my mind, I'm thinking, you're an idiot, right? You're an idiot. And I know that's not a good trait. I get it. But I call myself an idiot, right? That's how type 1s think, right? And so I'll give you an example of that. So can we agree for a minute that we all talk to ourselves? We all talk to ourselves in our brain, right? So when I talk to myself, right, one of the things I frequently say is, come on, man, like, get it right. Come on, get it right. Or I'll call myself an idiot, right? So let me give you a little example. So Patty and I had our 2-year-old granddaughter for a few days, and I took her back to her parents, and not long after we got in their home, she's walking around the house. I'm not really paying attention. She's talking, and her parents are laughing. I said, what's so funny? Because she's walking around the house saying, come on, man. What a curse I put on her. But that's how people think, right? It's kind of subconscious. It's not necessarily out there. But this is important because this influences how you think and how you make a decision. So let's move on now to inviting dissent. This is critically important. because you really need to know the dissenting opinion, and it won't come easily to you. It'll come through others, but others won't come to you with a dissenting opinion if they're a leader, right? You have to go seek these people out, and you have to really value their opinion, and you have to gain their trust. And there's a great book on this, in Defense of Troublemakers, by Nemeth, who says, consensus, while comforting and harmonious as well as efficient, often leads us to make bad decisions. Conversely, dissent, while often annoying, is precisely the challenge that we need to really reassess our views and make better choices. So we should applaud dissent for the way it makes us feel. And as surgeons, I don't think we do that probably as much as we should. And we should know that authentic dissent, if we're the ones that are going to offer dissent, be authentic about it. Don't say, well, I just want to be the devil's advocate. No, take a stance. Press people on it, right? And really have authentic dissent. So these are 5 great folks that I know and worked with very closely at the University of Florida. This was my executive committee, which I considered advisory. These folks didn't really make the decisions, but I considered them my friends and a brain trust, and they advised me about problems and gave me a lot of really good feedback. I considered these folks my friends, but you should have heard what my friends told me, right? These people, I said, I don't want any yes men, and I didn't have any yes men, right? They were ruthless. They were ruthless in their criticism of some of the things that I was doing or wanted to do. And I really came to appreciate that later on. But I can tell you, there were many Wednesdays at 4:30 when I was squirming in the chair in front of these 5 guys, because they're tough guys. And they really made me think about what I was going to do. But it made the decisions better. It really enhanced the decision-making process. So I'm eternally grateful to these individuals. So now you were at step 6. So you've invited the dissent, right? And even though you've invited the dissent and you've heard the dissent, you have to realize that that might not change the decision that you make, and that you're still going to have to make a very difficult decision. And when you have to make a very difficult decision, right, you need to be transparent, not only about the decision, but why and how you arrived at that decision. People need to be able to understand that and think through it. And that doesn't mean that all individuals have equal access to all the information, but you need to provide your constituents with enough information so they can understand the rationale for making a decision and how it was made, and they can provide feedback. But it does come with limitations. Radical transparency. Do people trust one another, and are they willing to do that? How is the information going to be used against you? Probably, right? Probably. And, you just have to learn how to live with that. So let me give you an example. So the faculty in the department, they wanted more information about the finances, which is entirely reasonable. So that's not really the question. Yeah, the leadership agreed we should be more transparent about this. The question is how much information do you share, right? So you can share department finances, division finances, but when it comes to the individual, how about individual surgeon productivity, right? Revenue generation, their expenses, their compensation, right? It gets to be quite a bit of information. And what I learned from this is that you should be transparent, absolutely, but you can put out too much information. You can put out too much information, it'll hurt your culture, right? Because people will start bickering about compensation, even though I was in the Sunshine State, right? All the data were available publicly. Everybody knew how to get the data. They got the data, but when you put it out as a department, it caused a rift, right? So I think you need to be careful about that. And importantly, you really need to establish a culture of trust. in your unit so that you can share information freely. So, step 7, communication. Of course, we're going to tell the truth, right? But I'm always surprised at a number of folks or groups that don't tell the truth. You have to keep that in your mind. Even if you are wedded to the truth, maybe not everybody else is, and you just need to keep it in mind. When you put out a message, you need to have the unity of the message and the leadership behind that message. And when you distribute information, you need to distribute it through several means and at different times so that people who have different work environments have access to the information. And whether it's through a town hall, through department conferences, websites, emails, social media, or individual faculty members, this becomes a critically important step. So when you're communicating decisions, right, you should really try to explain your decision making and get the word out to multiple people. And often in surgery, we use email. And email's good for short message, right? It goes out to everyone at once. And it can be used, you can create a link to your website to provide more information. So email's pretty good, I think, for disseminating and communicating information, but it does come with its limitations. So at some point in your career, you may be faced with making and communicating a very difficult decision. And this is really going to test you as an individual and as an organization, right? So if you have a difficult decision to communicate, create a schedule when you're going to distribute the information, to whom you're going to distribute it, how will the stakeholders learn about the message? Will they learn about it in a conversation, an email, or a news release? And how much do you trust people to share this information? And how might the information be used? And how do you prepare follow-up questions? So I'll tell you a story that about 6 weeks after I arrived at St. Louis University as a dean, I got a call from the LCME who had visited us before I started at SLU, and they told me that our medical school would be on probation. That's about the worst thing that can happen, right, is your medical school go on probation. So we crafted a plan for communication. We had 30 days. I talked to everybody that I knew and people I didn't know about what to do about our LCME probation, because the LCME gives you 30 days to either accept the designation of probation or to request reconsideration. That means the LCME got the facts wrong, and you can counter with data and facts. So that was going to be possible at SLU because we were non-compliant in 6 of the 12 standards, and the LCME judges medical schools on 93 elements, and we had deficiencies in 22 of 93 elements. Just too big, right, to be able to request reconsideration. But one person thought we should request reconsideration. And this was a very popular student dean who went on a campaign across the campus to say, look, we should request reconsideration. All the experts told me, Kevin, don't do this. So I had to make a decision. And I made the decision that we would get on with remediating the probation. We would not request reconsideration. And this blew up, right? This blew up in the newspapers, on social media. I spent days on the phone with the press, with parents, with alumni, donors, parents of students, right? And I had to face, pretty nasty editorials by people that weren't even in the know about medical education. So at some point you may have to encounter and face a situation like this. That's where the principles come in handy, right? Tell the truth, tell what you're doing. We posted all our citations, every bit of information we got from the LCME went on our website. Here it is, have at it. And despite us being very transparent, I think we got a lot of criticism from folks, but I think, you know, if you look at it, 19 months later, we were off probation. And I think communication really helped us move forward as a program. So just to review the 7 steps in decision making, what's the question? What's your hypothesis, right? How do you gather the data, analyze the data to make a decision? What's your self-awareness of what's going on in the process? Invite the dissent. And step 6 is address the transparency, and step 7 is to communicate it. So that's a review of this 7-step process. It's just an option, right? And I'd welcome feedback from you, from everybody to see what you think about it. Also, right, making a decision is a learned behavior, like many learned behaviors. And you can have an approach to it, and you can be deliberate and have a lot of perseverance, right? And it requires really a will to stick with it and get better. And this is the power of passion and perseverance in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, is really powerful. And it's a very good learning tool. So I would highly recommend this publication. And then finally, just a couple words about how you comport yourself in the decision-making process, because it can make a big difference. It can make you or it can break you, right? So a couple words that I think about are grace, right? Or elegance, beauty or form, manner, motion, a pleasing or attractive quality, favor or goodwill. So I aspire to exhibit grace, right? And humility or modesty of opinion of one's own importance or rank. Those are 2 aspirational goals for me. I always think that as surgeons, we should be inoculated with humility, right, based on patients having complications, right? We should be humble because we never know when our patients are going to have a complication. And I really like the statement that we should win with humility and lose with grace. So this, being president of the Southeastern Surgical Congress is a real privilege, and I really want to thank LP. They make it really fun. So Margie and Jill and Chris and team, you guys are spectacular. You do a great job. You clearly enjoy your work. So I'd ask everybody to give them a round of applause. Over the last few years, being involved in the leadership of the Southeastern Surgical Congress has been a great learning experience for me. I've learned from some of the best leaders in surgery. These folks are fantastic. And I'm always really impressed at the number of people that come together to put on this meeting and to run this organization, and they have a commonality, right? And that's education and sharing information and making people better. So I want to thank everybody here listed on this slide. They've really had a profound influence in my development. At Mayo and at UNC and at Florida, I've had great leaders. I've really been privileged to train under some of the best people. The late Keith Kelly was a scholar and a gentleman, and I worked with him as a medical student and a resident, and I think he really helped me get on the right track. Mike Saar was trained in part by Keith Kelly. And Mike Saar and I go back since I was a medical student, and I talk to him every week. We talk every week about the journal. So you don't know, right? You don't know when some of your mentors in residency or medical school are going to come back and you're going to work with them closely. So it's a privilege for me to learn from Mike Saar on a weekly basis. At UNC, George Sheldon and Tony Meyer, the late George Sheldon and Tony Meyer, they really went above and beyond to help me advance my career. They were 2 great academic surgeons who really knew how to help me move forward, and they provided me the resources to do that. So I'm greatly appreciative to them. At UF, Ted Copeland and Tim Flynn, They freely shared their wisdom with me. They have a lot of it, and it was a great learning experience to work with them. My dean, Mike Good, was always available to me and very helpful, and I really appreciate and respect Mike. And my good friend Rob Romas, the chair of medicine at Florida, he and I had a great relationship, and I trust his counsel. So, as a chairman and as a dean, I've certainly run into some situations that proved to be quite difficult, and you need to phone a friend, right? And these are the folks that I call because I'm in deep doo-doo, or I need help, or I need advice. And so Spence and Ken, LD, Craig Kent, Selwyn, Julie, everybody's helped me. And one of the things about these folks, I never had to think twice about the advice I got. I always got great advice. But one of the things I really appreciated is, when you're in a tight situation, right, that's kind of all you think about, and you're just absorbed by that. But these folks can give me a bigger picture, right, and say, hey, look, this too will pass. Might not be fun, right, or whatever, but, keep the big picture in mind. And so I really appreciate it. So thank you, folks. I appreciate that. So most of all, great family. Really great family. I practice this so much to not do this. I can't help it because I love them. My mom, she's here, really appreciative. I might be the runt of the litter, actually, at home. Seriously. I have a sister who's the head of development at the Mayo Clinic. Right. I got a brother who's a managing partner, CEO of a pretty major accounting firm in the Twin Cities. I have another brother who owns his own mobile CT, MRI, right? I have a brother that's a radiologist, right? We came from a father that had an 8th grade education and a mother who had a high school education. They knew the value of education. That's important. So thank you. She's a little better than I would have never predicted this. And our kids. I also want to thank our great friends, the Irelands, who traveled from Chapel Hill to be with us. We've been friends from our UNC days. Our kids are about the same ages, and they have always been there for us, so we really appreciate it. Thanks, Greg and Lori. And then the kids are absolutely wonderful. You can see in the picture that it's Teddy and Callista's wedding outside of Atlanta, and they have been married almost 2 years, close to 2 years, and they're really enjoying life in Atlanta. And Callista is a speech pathologist. Teddy works at a marketing firm in Atlanta. And importantly, they are only 2 months out from our 3rd grandchild. So that's fantastic. Brittany is in New York City, and she works in the marketing business for media companies and has really done a great job in New York. Advancing her career, and she's really dedicated to her work. It's really a pleasure to see her grow personally and professionally. And if you like the slides, guess who reviewed them and made them right? Thank you. I know I'm funny. And Andrew and Megan are in Virginia, in Poquoson, Virginia, and we have 2 grandchildren. Everett and Vivian, who have made so much joy in our life that we're just incredibly happy to have them. And then finally, I want to thank Patty. Patty's been a saint. She's been with me for 35 years, and it's been a great 35 years. It's not always easy, but she's always been there for me, so I really appreciate that. And then most of all, I really want to end by thanking the Southeastern Surgical Congress. It's been a privilege to serve as the president, and you all have really enhanced my education, so thank you. Thanks, I appreciate it.